Hello everyone, Simon Bard here, and welcome to another Top 10 list. We all have our favorite movies that we like or even love, but what makes them fun and enjoyable are their many moments. Their scenes, whether big or small, would leave a huge impact on people. They often present why we love the movies they're in, or could be what makes an okay film stand out based on just one scene. But whatever the case, the moments that happen would always make us smile, cry, cheer, or lift our spirits in some way. And I'll be going over my favorites today, so get ready for a top 10 list of my top 10 favorite movie moments. Number 10. The Dark Side of the Moon from Apollo 13. While the moments in this movie range from uplifting to intense, the one that gets me is within the middle of the film, where after Apollo 13 experiences its disaster and is now drifting off towards the moon's orbit, helplessly. And as it reaches the other side of the moon, the crew loses communication, and Jim Lovell's wife cries, fearing the thought of losing her husband in space. But on the flight, Fred Haise and Jack Swigert gaze at the moon's surface in awe and wonder, while Jim Lovell looks away. Yet, as he stares down at one spot on the moon, he imagines himself being on the moon, making his first steps, dragging his fingers through the gravel, and picking up rocks. But when his imagination looks up at Earth, his real self looks at Earth as well, and blocks the planet with his thumb and one eye closed. Just like in the beginning when he did it with the moon. All of it done pretty well in a vivid pace and with beautiful music, up to when Jim decides to go back home. The way the scene's all set up, shot, and performed is pretty nice, and it accomplished what it was going for. And for being my favorite live-action film, it's a scene that I enjoyed from beginning to end, and it still works. Number 9. The Exorcism from The Exorcist. I have gone a bit about this scene in my review of the movie, but let's go on a little more. While I haven't seen the original version yet, I found the director's cut to be okay, but the exorcism scene is very well put together and handled. It starts off with Father Lancaster Merrin arriving at the McNeil's house to help perform the exorcism of Regan with Damien. And as the priests get themselves prepared, Merrin explains the way the devil works in the human body, while Damien tells Merrin that Regan could be alive, yet Merrin doesn't believe it. And so the two priests enter Regan's room, where she's tied to the bed, as the priests perform the exorcism. And then so many things happen as the scene moves along. Regan's head spins around, the bed begins shaking, Regan rises from the bed, which has the priests say the power of Christ compels you over and over as they sprinkle holy water on Regan. While it's not really scary in any way, it is completely intense and engaging, making it one of the most memorable scenes in the film. It's all done with no music and letting the visuals and sounds do the work. It's suspenseful, it's interesting, it's dark, it's a well-done scene for what many say is the scariest movie of all time. And though I still find the movie to be okay, this one scene is really worth the watch, and I enjoyed every minute of it. Number 8. Sorry Wilson from Castaway. One of the things about Castaway that made it such a good movie is how much there's little to no dialogue within the second act. But when there is dialogue, it felt pretty right, and Tom Hanks delivered them pretty good. And it's near the third act where it shines the most. It begins when, after spending 5 years on a deserted island, Federal Express worker Chuck Noland finally gets off the island on a boat he made and brings along a volleyball he named Wilson, his only friend for that long, with him. And as he sails out in the ocean, he comes across a whale and eventually finds Wilson, quote-unquote, leaving him behind. Thus Chuck cries out, "Wilson, I'm sorry, Wilson, Wilson, I'm sorry," as the movie's one and only theme plays. This small moment is pretty sad, and made me teary-eyed when seeing a ball, that in many respects became a character, leave away, since he and Chuck started out when Wilson was just a ball with a blood-stained handprint made into a face. And though the scene may be brief, it did it pretty well and flowed naturally. For even if it sounds silly and a bit crazy, there's no denying that Tom Hanks, once again, proves to make it the best as it can be. As for what it is, it pretty much succeeds. Number 7. The opening cartoon from Who Framed Roger Rabbit. For being one of my favorite films, Roger Rabbit certainly has lots of wonderful moments, whether funny, scary, or just awesome. But out of all the scenes to choose from, the opening definitely takes the cake for me. It's basically a 3-minute cartoon that not only introduces baby Herman and Roger, it also shows what kind of stuff the two do, which also plays out in the 3 animated short films that follow the movie. And its setup? The owner goes out, leaving Roger to look after Herman, but Herman gets distracted by something he likes and goes after it, while Roger tries to save Herman from potential dangers, yet gets it himself. This opening would eventually set the tone for all the crazy things that's to happen later on, and yet it's just as funny. The slapstick, the fast-paced animation, the exaggerated expressions and movements, it's all pretty chaotic, but in a good way. It's fast, it's fun, it's funny, it's all over the place. It's simply amazing. And if this cartoon didn't exist, then the short films wouldn't have happened, as well as the Mindy and Buttons cartoons from Animaniacs, which by the way is a total rip-off of the Roger Rabbit shorts, but that's another story. Overall, it's a fun and very good opening to a great film, and it makes me smile every time I see it. Number 6. Clarice's Last Visit from The Silence of the Lambs. And what I mean by last visit, I mean by the last time Clarice Starling meets Hannibal Lecter under police custody. That is until the sequel where they meet each other without police custody, but that's another story. With this scene, however, it's all done very well and the performances do pull it off. It happens after Lecter gives the location of Buffalo Bill, and he's placed in a big cell inside a huge room to spend the night, where guards stand by. While there, Clarice comes by to see him one more time to get the last info on Buffalo Bill. But Lecter wants to know more of Clarice's past, and so Clarice finishes what she started, saying the reason she left her uncle as a child was because he slaughtered lambs, and remembers their screams until they stop. Not only is this where the title of both the book and the movie came from, it's all done through POV shots, and as the scene gets more disturbing, the camera zooms in closer and closer to the characters' faces, which becomes unsettling yet engaging as Lecter and Clarice stare you down. In fact, all the scenes with Clarice and Lecter have the same unsettling yet engaging feeling. But the last one is the best of them all, with great camera setup and performances. It's such a chilling scene that really left an impression on me, and I never looked away. Number 5. Kris Kringles' arrest from the Miracle on 34th Street remake. Now you may think that the remake of the 1947 Christmas classic wouldn't have much to it, since Kringles' arrest in the original was very short and not much. But here, it's given so much more effort than what the original did, and I really enjoyed it. It happens after Tony, who was the original Santa until getting replaced, fakes getting beaten up by Kris, and Kris is arrested for it. And the rest of it shows a montage of news bulletins of Kris's arrest, Cole's competitor feeling proud, Kris staring out of the window in the Bellevue Asylum, and Doris Walker moving through a crowd of people standing outside the department store, as Kris's speech of being Santa Claus plays in her head. All of it done with a haunting choir and 1 or 2 bits of slow motion. Like most of the remake, this scene made it better than the original in how much it takes its time to let an important point in the film sink in. It's all nicely paced, well constructed, pretty haunting and engaging. For a film that's as good as the original, it's nice to know that what makes it better still shines through. And this scene is one of the things that made the remake a little more interesting. Plus the cameo of Alfred from the original all grown up makes it in. Number 4. The ending to the original Psycho. As one of the first, if not the first movie to be about a psychopath and done by Alfred Hitchcock, it not only gave the best ending, but it was presented in the most memorable way possible. And it goes without saying that in order to talk about this, I have to say that this is a huge spoiler to anyone who hasn't seen the film, so if you haven't, go to the next number. With that said, let's take a look. It begins shortly after Norman Bates is caught and brought to the police, and again after the detective analyzes and states Bates' condition and backstory. So it's not really the full ending I appreciate, it's the very ending, when it just shows Norman sitting alone wrapped in a blanket. And we hear his thoughts, as his mother, saying how no one would suspect her doings, even saying how she'll never hurt a fly, as there's a shot of a fly on his hand, followed by a close-up of his face, in which his smile fades very quickly to show his mother's skull, and then end with the car being pulled out of the swamp. Just the shot of Bates smiling is the best thing about this scene. Seeing it made me smile, yet its transition is somewhat creepy, but it makes up for being the most memorable and a bit eerie. Still, the shots for this very small scene are nicely done, and Anthony Perkins' performance in this is astounding. And this last scene is very good at bringing in the chills, as well as the creeps. Number 3. We Are Here from Dr. Seuss's Horton Hears a Who. For something that was done fairly well in the Chuck Jones animated special, with the songs, colors, and whatnot done in a laid-back fashion, the movie, on the other hand, took it to a whole new level, presented on a bigger scale with moody colors and a grand fashion. Like the book and the special, the film shows Horton being roped and caged by the Wickershems as the dustbeck and Clover are about to be dropped in bezelnut oil, while the Who's try to make noise in order to get them to know that we are here. This is the scene that puts the one in the special to shame. It's really epic and grand, it's got great and huge music and choir, it has wondrous animation, and all of it done with such immense power and weight. All of it building up to a huge and climactic end as JoJo says its first word. As a scene that plays out simple in the book and in the special, it's such an irony of how the scene plays out in the movie, being all spectacular and massive, and without holding back. And this is one of many great reasons why I find this movie to be my favorite movie, because it's just so awesome. Number 2. The second Moonlight howl from Alpha and Omega. Again, this is another scene I've gone over in my review of it, but again, let's get more out of it. As I stated before, there are 3 Moonlight howls that happen in the movie. The first one was good, done likely with an upbeat and kind of techno way of doing so, with nice vocals attached. The third one was just okay, in which all the characters howl in their own way, and, well, not bad, it's not very much. But the second one, for my taste, is the best one. It goes back and forth between Kate and Humphrey on a train back to Jasper Park, and Garth trying to howl better with Lily teaching. So, with the moon shining above, Humphrey wants Kate to join him in howling at the moon, and of course she does, which leads to both Garth and Lily howling for a brief moment, and then back to Humphrey and Kate howling, which is done very beautifully and sweet, and it feels very uplifting and satisfying towards the end. It's all beautifully paced, beautifully shot, beautifully animated, beautiful vocals, and all of it building up to a perfect conclusion. What more is there to say of this? The entire scene is both beautiful and uplifting, and it gets me every time. And my number 1 favorite movie moment is... Waiting for an Absolution from Titanic. This is the one. This is the one movie moment that I enjoy, heck, love the most. And every time I watch it, I always find myself crying at it, because it's done so beautifully. It's right after the Titanic sinks and Jack Dawson dies from the cold, trying to keep Rose alive. And by the time a lifeboat passes by her, Rose manages to get his attention, as old Rose tells of that one boat and how many people were saved, all waiting for an absolution they feared would never come. Thus, the surviving passengers wait on their lifeboats, as James Horner's music and Cecile's vocals play out until the Carpathian ship arrives to pick them up. Yeah, it's a pretty brief scene, but the way it's handled is perfectly done. It shows how much the survivors of the ill-fated ship had to go through when faced with the notion of never being saved, as well as all the terror they witnessed, and leaving almost all the passengers to die in cold waters. It's very touching, beautifully composed, and just an all-around great scene. And this is one of the many things about this film that I enjoy, which goes to show that Waiting for an Absolution is my number 1 favorite movie moment. And that is it. So thank you for joining me. Like, comment, subscribe, follow me on Facebook or Twitter, and tune in next week for a new video.